think the people that treat their divorce like their business are probably a step ahead of a lot of people, because they just look at it as a problem and go, right, we need to solve this.
Welcome to Off the Record, a podcast about all things law for businesses in Queenstown. Today we've got a very exciting episode. This is our first episode with a guest. Very exciting. So we're very happy to be joined today by Adrianne McLean. Welcome, Adrianne.
Thank you very much. It's really exciting to be here. Thank you for asking me.
No problem. So Adrianne has just come into town. She's a new lawyer starting with Mactodd, but she is an extremely experienced lawyer, and one, if you've got certain types of problems, you really need to get in touch with. So starting off, Adrianne, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, what your background is, and how you've found your way to Queenstown?
It's been a little bit of a journey. So I've been a relationship property specialist now for nearly 2 decades. So I deal principally with trusts and companies and a lot of high net value separations and divorces, which tend to be all out, slug out fights when there's companies and trusts involved. Prior to that, I was a psychologist, which I really enjoyed. So I bring that into my practice. I want people to try and split up with as much dignity and peace and goodwill to each other as possible. So I'm hoping eventually to be able to change the face of divorce from the sort of litigious position that we have now.
Yeah. It doesn't sound very good for lawyers, though.
Well, I think it is. I mean, I'm a collaborative lawyer, so I'm qualified in that, and I'm also a mediator. And it's funny because there's this thing that, we're going to generate huge revenues, by increasing litigation. But really, I don't think we do. There are so many people separating that really it's an open market. And to be honest, I think the public have changed their perception. I don't think people want these, long drawn out separations. It's not good for the individual, and it's certainly not good if you're running a company or you're, a CEO in a public company. I mean, that's even worse. You've got public scrutiny as well. So to be honest, I think the public is ready for a change, as well as a lot of lawyers.
And because you're New Zealand's only qualified divorce coach.
That's right.
Lawyer.
Yeah. So I went to a conference, I think it was a few years ago now in America, and I met a lawyer that was a divorce coach, and I was like, what? But then I found out it's huge in Los Angeles, and the big firms over there have several lawyers in their firms that are also divorce coaches. So obviously if we're coaching, we don't handle someone's divorce, but we do work closely with the lawyer. It can really help people, and it helps focus people as well. I mean, I'm sure all of us have been in a room where somebody just absolutely loses it, and to have a coach there and to bring it all back together just keeps it on track.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Because people come out of relationships, things are quite fraught, potentially very raw, depending on how long ago it was they separated. Do you find that clients often come to you quite recently after their divorce or after their separation, or do things take some time? Do some clients build up issues and you get presented with an issue quite late in the piece? Or
a little bit of both. I think the people that treat their divorce like their business are probably a step ahead of a lot of people, because they just look at it as a problem and go, right, we need to solve this. And so they will go off to their respective lawyers. The really, really smart ones will use one lawyer, settle it, and then just go to their final lawyer to do the signing off. I mean, obviously, they're the really smart ones. I have to say, the wealthier people are, they're more likely to have that kind of divorce. They just don't want the public scrutiny, and they certainly don't want their children in the limelight. But a lot of people just leave it way too late, and they're arguing and they're being nasty to each other, and things have been said that can't be taken back. And if there's children in the middle of it, it's really, really miserable. And some children never recover. It's interesting when you have an adult whose parents went through a divorce and they still vividly remember their parents arguing, like when they were 9 and 10 years old. That is not a legacy you want to leave for your child. So my view is the sooner you see a divorce lawyer and get specialist advice, you're so much better off.
Well, Off the Record is about business in Queenstown in particular. So we want to really take a business focus to the kind of divorce and relationship property situation. So really, what are the things that businesses can do, or what are the things that happen, particularly in relation to business, that become relevant in a relationship property context? Valuations and various things like that, and how things sort of change. What is the takeaway message that people can take on how to approach a divorce in a sort of complex business
I think
situation?
it goes right back to the beginning. So particularly if you have a business and you're entering into a relationship, that's the time to get your specialist advice. And you do need to be having those awkward conversations around prenuptials, and just talking to someone how you see the business. Do you see it as yours? Is it something that you're quite happy to share? And I think the problem is those conversations aren't had until the very end. And sometimes you find out your partner's had a completely different opinion to what you have had all along. And particularly if you're in a second relationship, you're foolish if you don't see a lawyer and discuss these issues. And I appreciate the conversation might be hard to have at home, but it's easy to have that conversation at that point in your relationship versus 15 or 20 years down the line.
We were talking a little bit earlier, Adrian, around how people's misconceptions can fool them, essentially, where you've got this protective veil that is the limited liability company, and people assuming that it is protected against claims in relationship property. And what sort of impact do you see that having play out in a lot of your client scenarios?
A lot of my clients are really shocked. They'll often have family property, a farm or whatever, in a trust. And, of course, as you say, it's limited liability, and they feel quite shielded. And then to find out that there's lawyers like me that actually not make a sport, but it's our job to be able to go behind these. And of course, we've got legislation behind us. We've got various aspects of various legislation that allows us to encroach on what is sort of seen really as quite sacred property. So for a lot of people, it's really horrifying.
And the courts are showing quite an increased willingness to...
I was about to say that. The recent decision of Preston, I'm being melodramatic, but the court's decision was basically, if you're breathing the same air, look out.
Do you think that's kind of reached a high water mark, though, and it's likely to sort of be scaled back? We saw, obviously, the kind of very well-known case of Clayton, and that seemed to be like it suggested that trusts more or less were completely impotent when it came to protect relationship property, but we're likely to see that sort of come back, so trusts are more of a protection against relationship property claims.
I think New Zealand has had a massive love affair with trusts, and I think we have more trusts per capita than pretty much any other country. But they've been poorly run trusts. They're set up often by a lawyer that doesn't necessarily have relationship property experience, obviously huge property experience, but they're quite different when you end up in a divorce court. And I think with the new Trusts Act, there are far more onerous obligations around trusts and how they're going to be run. So in one part, I think it will be slightly harder to overturn, well, not overturn, but to get into really, really well-run trusts. But the courts have definitely changed their stance. And, of course, under the Property Relationships Act, you're bound, by Section 1N, aren't you, that any settlement must be fair and reasonable. And so judges are also bound by that. So it's not the simple logistics of, I've got the homes and the whatever property in a trust, and I've got the company. The courts are looking at a fair and equitable distribution, and they have become incredibly inventive in how to break through. So I think the Trusts Act is good. I think we're going to see really well-run trusts, but no, I don't think it's really going to halt that equality issue, really.
Do you think so?
Well, the reality is most women and children are significantly disadvantaged by a divorce. You know, men usually aren't. Often a divorce will occur when a man is in the middle of a really lucrative career, and whereas women are often starting over, and they can be held back, particularly if they've got a very young child and they can't enter into the workforce or, you know, really attend university to finish their degree. So it's a complex issue, and I guess I've had so many clients sit in front of me that if they just had have gotten that specialist relationship advice, they would be in a much better position. And also too, it wouldn't be as much of a shock to their partner. I mean, it must be pretty horrifying if you've been with someone for, say, 15 years and then they suddenly turn around and go, well, I never wanted you to be entitled to any of this. This is my baby. This, this is my hard work.
And it's around, it's clients that I've spoken with, it's recognising monetary and non-monetary contributions to a relationship, and I mean, within the context of a business, would it get very confusing if, say, one partner owned the shares in a business and the other partner was to work in the business, potentially unpaid for a long period of time, essentially running that business? What are some complex scenarios you've found in that respect?
That is probably the number one, where the partner will be saying, well, she hasn't, because it's usually the woman, she hasn't contributed a lot, she's done a little bit, and it's minimised. And I think the courts have been quite quick, well, slow, if you look at the decades it's taken them, but in recent times, really, really quick to go, no, we're not going down that road. So that's why any contribution is now considered equal. To be honest, my view is that's fair, because we all contribute. In different ways. But I think one of the most complicating factors is I handled a recent separation for a really large New Zealand, very successful New Zealand company, and there were four partners in the firm, and one of them was getting separated. It was messy, it was really nasty, but he ended up having to pay her out several $1 million. Well, that really, I mean, his sole income, when you think about it, is from the business, and that deeply impacted on the other partners. So my advice is, if you're in a business, and particularly if there are other directors, other partners, that, these are the conversations you need to be having. If your marriage ends, how are we going to protect ourselves, and so on, and so forth. And it's really about having those discussions. And the problem is most people don't until they sit down in front of me, and that's where most of the issues arise.
You can imagine that being quite an awkward conversation to have between two directors of a company or two shareholders of a company saying, hey, how's your relationship going? If it's on the rocks, that it affects me. So
well, and it does, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, if one shareholder of a joint venture has a relationship property breakdown, and the other all of a sudden is potentially having to deal with the other side of the relationship.
Can't afford to buy the other out.
Exactly. And for this company, they were just at a really, really tricky point where they had basically put everything back into the company, for their exceptional growth. So they'd done really well, but he didn't have a large relationship property pool. So to pay her out a couple of million would have been fine, even 5 years down the road, because he probably would have had a home of equal, similar value, particularly in Auckland with their real estate prices up there. So he could have done a swap, but this was really, really messy, and he fell out with one of the other business partners. Everybody took their view, and it was messy. And we had quite a large meeting, and they just said they'd never considered it. They'd never considered what would happen if any of their relationships broke down.
Well, how would you approach that then if you're a board of a company? Is it something that you'd say, all right, well, let's put it as an agenda item on on the upcoming for the upcoming meeting, or?
Personally, I think you should.
Yeah.
I really do. And I think to get good commercial relationship advice is not going to hurt. I mean, even if you spend an hour with a lawyer and that's a couple of $100, when you look at the cost of litigation, I mean, I've handled litigation where they've spent $500,000 each.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy. And it's years. And it's not just the money side of it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of people that, you know, that isn't particularly going to hurt.
Yes.
But the point is it's the emotional toll it takes on you. And as I say, if there are children involved, it's not worth it, because you're just dragging your children along behind it.
Yes.
And it's a fallacy to think that they don't know what's going on, or they don't feel that stress and tension.
Yeah.
So I think getting legal advice at the beginning, or even if you're in a business now, it would pay to get legal advice. And I think it's something that you need to update and just be mindful of.
I like your take on it. And it would make sense, of course, because Adrian's got a book, don't you, on some
Oh,
practicals.
that's right.
Tell us about that.
I've recently released a book on Amazon, and it's the low-cost divorce solution, and it's how not to get screwed by your partner, your lawyer, or your mind. So it's split into two parts, the legal part. So as a divorce specialist, I see 6 common mistakes all of the time.
Yeah.
The first one, which we've really been discussing, is just not getting good quality legal advice right at the beginning, leaving it way too late. And the second part of my book is broken up more into my coaching practice of how to get through it, particularly when you're in the middle of these high conflict divorce. So it's split out over 2 areas.
One of the things that I picked up reading the synopsis of your book and other things was this question of people using their lawyer as a sort of a de facto counsellor.
Yeah.
And I know,
I picked up on
I know.
It's actually not just relationship property, it's other things as well.
Yeah.
Where people suddenly have a relationship with somebody that they know that they can trust, that they know is confidential, and they start just treating that person as though you're a counsellor. And sometimes as a lawyer you're thinking, well, this person knows what my hourly rate is, and this, I don't necessarily want to say to that person, look, you need to go and get some, often I have actually, but I'm not necessarily going to say, look, you need to go and get some help. Actually, sometimes help's hard to get. There's a lot more lawyers than there are counsellors around.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think that's why a lot of American firms have several lawyers that are divorce coaches.
Yeah.
So often it's quite normal for a client to come in over there, choose their lawyer and have a divorce coach to keep them on track. I think the hardest thing is when someone's life is completely turned upside down and financially they are going to be hit in some way, and they're just sitting there absolutely sobbing. And I mean, how are you meant to take instructions? And it is difficult. Yeah.
And so if you're a coach to a client, you're not going to be their lawyer, or can
That's
you be?
right. No. So it's completely split. But when I've been a divorce coach in Auckland with other lawyers, we'll all work together in meetings and groups, and particularly around mediations. And often I'll attend those, more like a McKinsey friend. I don't really say a lot, but just to keep it on track. Because again, I mean, you guys would have experienced that. You're in a mediation, and then one client just gets so upset you can't bring them back on track, and you can lose several hours, if not the mediation, if it's not handled properly.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, isn't it?
It is an interesting dynamic, but to be honest, I think mental health is, it's good to see it coming to the fore.
Yeah.
And let's face it, I don't think there's anything much more stressful than a divorce, other than the death of a loved one. And I think they are, psychologically, they're seen as similar events, aren't they, in someone's life?
Absolutely.
And I think we need to be cognizant of that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And so, what are the practical tips for people in business to take away from all of this? Is it the messages get legal advice? Yeah.
I think so, and particularly if you've got a company and you're entering into a new relationship, I think it's really important to get legal advice.
What are the barriers that stop people in your mind from getting that legal advice, from signing a prenuptial agreement? are they kind of worried they're going to upset the relationship, or they...
To be honest, I think it's more fundamental. I think it's that euphoria of being in love, and this is the person that I'm going to spend the rest of my life with.
Yeah.
And I think it's as basic as that, you know, that connection that you feel that you have with someone. And so you just don't turn your mind to what could happen. And that happens in subsequent relationships as well. I mean, you think if it's your second or subsequent relationship that you would turn your mind to that, but often people don't. And I've been practicing long enough that I've got clients that are on their third breakup, third and fourth breakup. And I think it's just, I think fundamentally people are trusting and they want to form connections. And I mean, those are deep personal connections, and I guess you just don't really think about it.
Falls a lot, isn't it? I mean, are you buying a present at that point?
Yeah. Do you think that clients are aware that prenups aren't just about drawing a line in the sand? Do you think that clients are aware of the flexibility around the fact that they can accommodate potentially shared incomes but separate investment properties? And to what extent does the media portray the prenup as this, you know, big glaring alarm bells?
I think we kind of all grew up on the American prenup, you know, the poor, you know, singer girl is marrying the rich Hollywood producer, and you know, they've got this airtight prenup. But I think, I mean, in my mind, my approach to it as a prenup is I'm bringing this into the relationship. I'm bringing the other person saying, well, I'm bringing this into the relationship, and if in the future we ever broke up, this is what I must take out. The rest of it is going to be relationship property moving forward. So I think really it's just that recognition. And again, it's that healthy discussion. And I don't think there are enough discussions around finances in many relationships, even the ones that last the test of time. I mean, really, we should be able to sit down and talk about these things with the people that we're closest to.
There's sort of a parallel there as well with wills and things of that kind as well, enduring powers of attorney.
That's right.
People not addressing those questions when they need to, when they're fully compos mentis, and it's sort of a similar question, isn't it? What happens if I die? And again, you can say, well, what happens if we split up?
We don't want to think about these things.
No, and that's what I mean. I think it's just the human condition. We just don't turn our mind to it. But of course, when you practice in this area, it's just like, oh my God, you did what?
You see
or
the
this
value,
happened.
You see the certainty and what people can achieve through having these conversations.
Definitely.
It's such a hard conversation though, isn't it? Like you go home, hey, I was thinking about, what should we do a relationship property agreement? I mean, that's...
Yeah, sometimes I wish that there were more programs in schools around this. You know, like I kind of look at the school curriculum sometimes, no offence to the school curriculum, and I think it's not really teaching our kids about life. I mean, why aren't they learning about mental health issues? Why aren't they learning about bullying? Why aren't they learning about finances?
Completely agree.
You know, all of these kind of things, because they're just so fundamental to life. I mean, I deal with a lot of domestic violence victims, and I work alongside organisations like Shakti and that, you know, providing my time and advice. And I'm just horrified that most people can't even identify domestic violence. You know, they're not allowed access to money, they're not allowed to leave their homes, they're only allowed 30 minutes at the supermarket, and they're getting psychologically abused. But they'll sit there and they'll say, oh, but he's never hit me. You know, because I just think we could be doing more to educate children, and then it wouldn't be a difficult conversation, would it? Because it would just be simply, oh, it's just finances.
Yeah.
And when it all boils down to it, it is.
Yeah.
And the same with wills. Like, why aren't we teaching younger people about this?
Yeah. And it's an interesting one. Do you think that generations, like over time, people are becoming more open about having these conversations? I talk about finances with my friends. I don't know if my parents did or do. And do you think that it's changing, or will people always prefer to keep things unaddressed until it becomes an issue within their personal
I
relationships?
think at the moment, most people, and I think too because there often is a power, for want of a better word, but a power imbalance in relationships. And I think a lot of people naively go into a relationship thinking, I don't have to worry about that. For example, he's doing it or he's taking care of that. And let's face it, you get into role-divided marriages by default. I mean, if you're at home with 3 children, I mean, heavens, it's like having 20 full-time jobs. You know, and your partner's out working and he's working really hard, of course you're going to get divided. And then often one person will just start to do the finances. But I would like to see more openness, and again, I still think it should start at school level, that these conversations should start so that they're not taboo. You know, as you say, you should be able to sit down with your friends, and because if you can talk about these things, you can get really, really good advice or tips or help, and just be more knowledgeable.
Yeah, and confident.
Yeah, definitely confident. And it is heart-wrenching as a lawyer when you have somebody sitting opposite you sobbing. They've got no idea what's owned. They've got no idea of any bank accounts. They literally know nothing, and that's pretty heart-wrenching. It's not easy to deal with. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's fun. Anything else you want to talk about, Adrian?
No, I can't think of anything. You brought up insolvency. Did you want to?
Yeah.
But I can't remember what you asked.
Well, I mean, it's the interesting question is that a lot of people, we're getting into a sort of a more uncertain business environment. You'd have to say, possibility that businesses could go under. There would probably be a lot of situations where one spouse, typically the woman, like you said, doesn't know really what's going on in the business necessarily, and then all of a sudden finds that the business is actually insolvent. Is it something that people can protect themselves from, or are you sort of, you really need to get a handle on what the business situation is before you're sort of at the bottom of the cliff?
Well, it kind of comes back to what we're talking about. It's about knowledge, isn't it? And understanding what your particular financial circumstances are with that particular partner. And that's what I mean. If you're not having that open dialogue, then when it hits the fan, as it can, I mean, nobody thinks about insolvency, but it can happen. And as you say, this COVID crisis, we've seen many, many businesses go to the wall.
Yes.
I don't think you can protect yourself per se, but I think it comes back to getting that legal advice and updating that legal advice. And I have had many people sit in front of me and I'll ask the fundamental question, do you have a trust? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Well, I think I signed some documents 10 years ago over the cornflakes and the orange juice. So I think it's just like anything. You've got to put the time and the effort in. And again, that comes back to good, solid legal advice, because if you're setting up a business, those are the sorts of things that you want to be discussing with your lawyer. How do I protect my family? Worst case scenario, what do I do? How do I protect them? How do I make sure, that we've still got a home and, some form of income and so on and so forth. So I think, again, it's that planning, and then maybe doing a yearly or a 2-yearly checkup of where you're at and potential pitfalls and what could come in the future. Insurance is, having a really good insurance advisor for these types of situations.
Nothing's set and forget, is it?
No, definitely not. And of course, that's the problem with prenuptials. Yeah, people sign them and think that they're safe, and then they get a lawyer like me that goes, no. It's seriously unjust. Let's go to court.
They get weaker over time.
They do get weaker over time, and fair enough too, because, at the beginning, if you've just met someone, but then 20 years later and you've got 3 children, well, it can be easily to be found to be seriously unjust.
And you're living in the home that's supposedly separate property, and I can imagine the kinds of circumstances that can change.
Yeah, exactly. So
Excellent. Well, it's been really great to have you on, Adrianne.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, guys.
We will certainly do this again sometime. And tell people how they can get hold of you if they need some advice about their relationship, if they think they need a prenuptial agreement, if things are looking a bit rocky.
Or if they want to buy your book.
If they want to buy my book, they can go to Amazon for my book. So just connect into there, and that is available. And you can phone me at Mactodd Lawyers in Queenstown.
Great. Well, it's great to have you on staff, Adrian.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Welcome.
Thank you very much for joining us for this latest edition of Off the Record.